The Better Business Analysis Institute
presents the Better Business Analysis podcast with
Benjamin Walsh.
Hi everybody and welcome back to the Better Business Analysis podcast with your host Benjamin Walsh from the Better Business Analysis Institute. If you haven't done your training yet, $199 US and you can get certified as a BA. Do it today. Today we're covering the top 10 questions business analysts should ask but really do. You're going to learn something today. Let's dive in. Now, some of these questions can be a bit awkward, so we're going to run through the questions, 10 of them, and we're going to talk about why they're significant, maybe cover a scenario, and then how to ask it. So let's dive in. Number one is the most important. It's what's the real problem we're solving here? Projects often address symptoms, not root causes. This question helps ensure that the work aligns with the actual business needs. There are many times where you're working on a solution or someone has come up with a solution or you're working on a kind of a generalized problem statement. And it's your job to ask the 5 whys, do a problem definition, and try and pull back and figure out what the root cause is. Here's a typical scenario. A stakeholder wants to implement a new CRM system, but actually hasn't identified the current system's shortcomings. So what do? This is how we do it. We might ask the question, it sounds like you're improving customer relationship management. That's the goal, right? Can we just take a step back and discuss the underlying challenges this system will solve? That way, I can make sure that my analysis targets the right issues and the requirements are focused on solving the problem you want. Do you notice that I turned it into a question more around myself and what I needed out of the situation? And of course, that reduces friction or the conflict, or I don't come across threatening or challenging. I just come across as someone who needs help. And so that's a great way of doing it. So remember that as we go throughout the other 9 questions. The second one shouldn't be threatening. It's number 2, and it's what does success look like? Stakeholders often have a vague or even conflicting idea of success. So that's why it's important to have one product owner. It's really important to clarify what success looks like for them. It prevents misalignment, overinvestment, underinvestment. So let's take a scenario where your team's rolling out a new feature. Maybe it's team driven, and you haven't agreed how to measure success. You can be in all sorts of trouble. So what you should do is ask upfront, once this project is complete, how will we know it's been successful? Are we focusing on any important metrics like revenue or user adoption or retention or something else? So that way, for example, if there was an expectation, and of course you don't know this without asking, that this new feature was going to increase customer signups or revenue, then you might be in trouble if the feature was actually about customer retention. So you've got to get that sorted up front. Number 3, it's who are the stakeholders? Who are the key stakeholders? And what are their priorities? And yeah, you can have a RASCI model with a matrix, but primarily it should be like a pyramid model. You should ideally have one product owner, a sponsor, maybe a couple of key stakeholders around them, and it gets bigger and bigger as you go down, but you should draw the line at the top in terms of decision making. So this is very, very common. There is missing or unconsulted stakeholders. Just had that happen on one of my pieces of work with some people who weren't engaged, and that can just derail projects, right? Especially you get to the end and then UAT, suddenly you've got some new stakeholders who are then checking to see if the solution met the requirements, and they weren't involved in the requirements phase. Happens all the time. You need to understand if priorities are like misaligned, and you need to align them, and you need to get decisions up front. If you don't do this, some engagement's done badly. You're just fighting fires all over the place when you want to go live. The scenario is that the IT team is driving a project, but end users and sales haven't been consulted, for example, or the person responsible for doing website content hasn't been involved, or the person who checks privacy hasn't been involved. So how do you ask that? When you start, you should say, who else will be impacted by this change? You should do a change impact workshop is what a change manager would do. But you can do it yourself, and you need to bring them into the conversation to get a bigger picture of their needs. So if you're doing with a product owner and that product owner consistently asks for feedback from a couple of their team members, for example, you should just bring those team members on. Top tip. Top tip to you, top tip to me. Okay, number 4. What assumptions are we making? Projects often fail because of unexamined, kind of unrealized assumptions. So like underestimating cost, overestimating user behavior, maybe thinking that users are going to adopt a new change faster than they will. I make an assumption about how long it's going to take to sign a piece of work off before you go live. So the scenarios here is that companies or organizations might assume that a customer want a mobile app without actually verifying demand. So that actually happens. Everyone went mobile app, and mobile apps do one thing, but maybe they don't want that. Maybe they're happy using the website experience and they're not going to use it on the go. It's not a kind of an appified idea. So to ask that question, we can say to the team, project owner, product owner, project manager, and your architects and developers, as a team meeting, ask the question, what assumptions are we making about user behavior or system capabilities or the ability for the organization to absorb this change? Do we need to validate any of these before we move forward? Okay, that's really important. Be bold, ask these questions. BAs are perfect for doing this. Number 5, this one's awkward, but I think you should ask this question. If we don't do this, what happens? This question challenges whether a project is truly necessary. And it helps prioritize resources. It's very awkward if you're on the project. Contractor consultant, for example, your reason for your existence, your income, is reliant on the project continuing. But it takes a brave person to ask this question. I have done this many times, and I consistently do it. So the scenario is that a stakeholder proposes maybe automating a really used process, for example. So they say, let's automate this, it will make it better, and actually no one uses it. So how do we ask this? We say, let's imagine if we didn't pursue this project. What would the impact be? Could those resources be better used on the other piece of work that needs to be done? So I think the critical thing here is to say, let's imagine we didn't pursue this project. So it's non-threatening and it allows people to think about what the alternatives are. Number 6 is, what are the risks and how do we handle them? Risk management done really badly. Usually risks are identified mid-project, not beforehand, not at the startup, which you should do. And then you just have all these issues because risks turn into issues when they're realized or not mitigated. So risks are inevitable. They're going to happen, but identifying them early allows for mitigation strategies. So for example, if a project has tight deadlines, you got to risk quality output. You got to kill your staff to try and get it done on time, and something's going to slip. Quality of life or quality of product. So you ask this by saying, what risks could impact this project's timelines, outcome, team morale, culture, user experience? How should we plan to address them if they arise? What's our risk mitigation process? Do we have a risk meeting? Do we do it at stand-up? Do we have a specific risk workshop up front? I would suggest you do. How are we going to monitor them? How are we going to escalate them? And how are we going to mitigate them? And who's responsible for doing that? Number 7, so important, definitely an area I play in, and it's asking the question, how does this align with organizational goals? You need to ensure that the project you're working on contributes to broader business outcomes rather than operating in isolation. Maybe your marketing department wants to develop a new bespoke tool, but the organization is standardizing software somewhere else. It happens all the time. The marketing department's brought in Salesforce, but you're a Microsoft shop and you've just, rolled out Power Apps and Dynamics in another area. So you ask the question, how does this project or this piece of work fit within the organization's strategic goals? And are there any specific initiatives we should align with? So for me, if you listen to this podcast and you do some training at the Better Business Analysis Institute, very cheap to do so, then you will work out that you start at the top. You start with your strategic objectives. So ideally, if you're involved up front, you won't end up in this position, but we sometimes get brought into this. Number 8 is, are there any constraints we should consider? And people get confused between issues and risks, constraints and assumptions. But constraints are things that you just can't move. So projects often get derailed by overlooked constraints like budgets, timelines, or legal requirements. They're things that just can't move. So they're like roadblocks, if you like. And a scenario is a team can discover late in the process that the new system doesn't comply with privacy laws. This happens often when you go overseas to look for a product and you realize, it's not compliant in New Zealand, it's not compliant in the States, or it doesn't cater for GST or VAT or whatever the US equivalent is, or we need social security numbers and it doesn't capture that in a secure way. So you ask this question by saying, are there any constraints, budgetary, give examples, technical, regulatory, process, privacy, that we need to factor into our plan because that's the type of work that this project might delve into. Number 9 is, again, one of my favorites. It's, what does the user journey look like? What does the customer journey look like? A user-centric of your internal or customer-centric of your external, a customer-centric approach ensures that the project delivers value to end users and customers, not just stakeholders who may not have skin in the game, apart from their, getting a promotion. When you do a system upgrade, we focus sometimes on back-end efficiency, reducing waste, but we neglect the user interface. Literally just had that today. Okay, I'm working for a client. They've changed their financial system. I got a random email from an offshore email address, nothing to do with the company I work for, which said, click here to reset your password. It had one tiny clipped branding of the company, nothing else about the email. The help link didn't work on the email. It looked like a phishing attack, but I happened to know that this was an upgrade happening. And so I clicked on the link, I know, but I was educated guess that this was something that the finance team had done. And of course, it asked me to enter a couple of new passwords. And it was, had nothing to do with the name of the project that was rolling this out. But then I was asked to enter a username. And so I entered the username that we were asked to select a few weeks ago. And of course, it didn't work. So I used the chatbot that was built, integrated, reset everything, and got in. But it was a terrible experience. There will be so many people, hundreds of them, who will not be able to get into the system or understand what's going on. Luckily, I'm, IT savvy, but it was so dodgy. And so this is an example of user interface. Emails are an example. Any channel that the user sees. So what do we do about that? So we ask the question, have we mapped out the user journey, the contact points? Have we worked out how this change will impact their experience or their onboarding to the new tool, in my example? Should we bring in some end users or some customers for feedback? Should we try it first? And number 10, which we don't do. We're so isolated in the way we work in IT. And it's, what have we learned from similar projects? Or has anyone else in their lifetime been involved in this? Should we bring them on board and learn something from their lessons of the past? Leveraging lessons from the past initiatives reduces repeated mistakes, improves customer outcomes or internal outcomes, and it's just good practice. If people have done something like this before, then leverage those knowledge and insights that will help you. It's an example where, for example, if a company has rolled out a failed project, right? Or they've tried something from a change management point of view and it didn't work last time, then we should learn why. It may have nothing to do with the technical makeup of your project or even the people in your project. It could just be the way in which you engage with that certain team. So how do we ask that? We say, have we undertaken a project like this before, or an initiative with that team before? If so, what went well? And what would we do differently this time? So there you go. There are 10 questions that we should ask as BAs that will help you in the real world be diplomatic, use data, and be precise and clear and provide clarity to the piece of work you're on. They are great questions. They're game-changing. You should ask them every time as a BA, especially if you've just landed on the project. I hope you learned something, and I'll speak to you next week.